So today we are going to be talking about traveling while you are getting your green card application, or if you are undocumented, because this makes such a difference depending on if you have a travel authorization or not. That's really going to decide what you will go through when you're trying to come back to the US. So let's talk about traveling, whether you're traveling outside of the US or within the US, to make sure that you are safe and protected every single step of the way. I am attorney Lilian Chukwurah. I'm a US-based immigration lawyer, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the US immigration law system. I always tell my clients to be careful with domestic flights, right? Especially if you are going to Puerto Rico, Alaska, or Hawaii, right? If you are not in the continental United States, you really need to be careful because you can end up in another country that is not the United States when your whole travel plan is to stay in the United States. So if you do not know, if you are in the US and you want to travel to another US state, all you need is proof of ID. So typically a state ID, a driver's license is all you need to board the flight, okay? But if you are taking an international flight, you need a passport. And if you are not a US citizen, you not only need your passport from your country of origin, you also need either a green card or some form of travel permit or a visa that allows you to come in and out of the US. So you need one of those three things to be able to travel. So when you are traveling within the United States, you do not need a passport, you do not need a travel permit, you do not need a visa, right? Because you are within the US. But once you leave the United States, even if it was not your choice, if someone on that flight did not have a travel permit or did not have US citizenship or a visa or permanent residency, you are going to end up in immigration proceedings, being deported, basically not being allowed to come back into the US, or being paroled into the US, basically being permitted to come back to the US. So you are really in a position where if you have not taken certain steps to make sure you are able to travel in and out of the US, and you are now ending up in this situation where your flight that you were confident was going to end up in the US ends up in a completely different country, now you have to go through border protection, you have to go through immigration to come back into the US. So if you are traveling from, let's say, New York to Chicago, right? You are just gonna go from terminal to terminal and out of the airport. You don't have to go through immigration because it's not an international flight. But when your flight that's supposed to go from Puerto Rico to Miami stops in Bahamas, and now it has to go from Bahamas to Miami, now it's an international flight, and now you have to go through immigration. So when this happens, when you get to the airport, they're going to be trying to figure out who's a US citizen, who's a permanent resident, what are the status that people have, and can they legally be allowed to come back into the US, right? It's about whether you can legally be allowed to come back into the US. And if you do not have any status and you are on this flight, unfortunately, you are now at the mercy of the officers at the airport of whether they're going to let you back into the US or put you in immigration court proceedings or detain you and deport you. Okay, they can deny you entry into the US. So I always like to, when my clients, I'll say this, I've had clients ask me where we have their green card application pending, and they ask me, can I travel to Puerto Rico? And my answer is technically yes, but I do not recommend it. Right? Technically, yes, as a, with your status, right? Even though you don't have status, you have a valid ID, so you can get on a flight to Puerto Rico. It's still part of the US, but there is that, 1 in 10 chance that your flight ends up being diverted to another airport that's outside of the US. And if that happens, now you're going to have an issue because you don't already have a travel permit. You don't already have your green card approved. So that's where you're going to end up having issues. Okay. So now let's talk about what you can do as your green card application is pending to make sure that if you ever end up in this situation that you are protected. So what you can do is make sure that you apply for a travel permit. So whenever you're applying for your green card, you have the right to also apply for a travel permit. Once your travel permit is approved, you are now legally allowed to travel back into the US if you end up in a situation like this. Okay. So that's what I tell my clients all the time is before you travel, let me know where you're going. So I make sure it's a place that you can actually travel to based on your status. And let's go ahead and file a travel permit if it's an emergency. Let's say you have to leave the US. You have to leave the US and it's an emergency. Let's apply for an emergency travel document so that you can travel and be able to come back in. Okay, with a green card application, if you travel outside of the US and you do not have advanced parole, right? You don't have a travel permission to travel, right? You don't have that travel permit. Guess what happens? You are not allowed to come back in. And your green card application that's pending is now considered abandoned. Okay, so it's going to be harder for you to come back into the US. So communicate with your lawyer as you're going through the process, because sometimes you think you can do certain things and technically you can, but we still don't recommend it because you could end up on that flight that is the 1 in 10 chance of you being outside of the US without a travel permit. Okay, and thankfully, I have not had this happen to any of my clients because they actually choose to take my legal advice and not take that flight to Puerto Rico, but, go to Florida, go to, enjoy your time within continental United States. Because like I said, if you're going from, let's say, New York to Chicago, if your flight needs to be diverted, it's going to go to another airport within the US, right? Another city, another state, but it's going to be within the US. Now, if you're going to Puerto Rico and you're trying to come back, you may end up in the Bahamas, completely different country that you do not have any rights to be in. And now, because you don't have that travel permit, you also don't have any right to be allowed back into the US unless you are paroled in by the officer at the airport. So it is one of those things that I tell people all the time. It is not a bad idea to travel while your green card application is pending if you have a travel permit approved. If you do not have a travel permit approved, please do not travel. Okay? If you do not have a travel permit approved while your green card application is pending, do not travel, because you may not be able to come back to the US, or even if you're able to, it's going to take a very long time for us to get you back here. So please, if you take nothing else out of this video, if you have a green card application pending and you know that you may want to travel outside of the US, apply for a travel permit. Right? Yes, there's an additional fee for the travel permit, but please apply for the travel permit so that you at least have an application pending. If there's an emergency that comes up, a parent is sick, someone dies, and you have to be there, we can do an emergency travel application to get you approved and out of the US within the time that you need. But if you don't already have an application pending, we're basically doing everything on that at that point. So please, please, please do not travel unless you have a travel permit. If you are not a green card holder, a US citizen, or someone on a visa that allows you to travel back and forth to the US, you need to worry about traveling to something to a state that's not within the continental United States. So I mean Puerto Rico, Alaska, and Hawaii. Worry about those, because if the flight gets diverted to another country, you are now outside of the US and you need to ask for permission to come into the US. But if you're going from one state to the other, right? You're going from New York to New Jersey. You're not asking for permission to go into New Jersey. You're not asking permission to enter the US. Okay, so it's really important that as your green card application is pending, that you keep in mind that this can happen to you if you travel to Puerto Rico, right? I always tell my clients, this is a possibility, and I am concerned about your plans to travel, right? This is a strong concern. So to avoid that issue, only travel outside of the US if you have an approved travel permit while your green card application is pending. Once you have your green card approved and your card in your hand, you are good to travel, okay? But while the green card application is pending, you need to make sure that you have a travel permit. All right. If you got value out of this video, don't forget to hit the like button. If you would like help with your green card process, your citizenship process, to get you to that next level, feel free to schedule a strategy session with me. It is a free 15-minute strategy session where we talk about your particular situation and figure out the best options for you. And you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, and clicking on Contact Us. And once you do that, you will be able to schedule a date and time that works best for you for us to speak. You can also call my office at 508-443-1788. Once again, I am attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships. Bye.